nirasya sarva sandeham akikritti sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Itam Sri Radhika Prana Nathapada Sarojayo Yena Premanubhutyasha Dattam Tam Shri Gurum Bhaje Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kelato Bande Bhagavatam Iman Anulavam mṛduni Patyakshito Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupari Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhutanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Adadana-stṛīṇāṁ Dantoir Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhulisam Janma Janmani Abhira Pali Patiputra Kanta Dasya Bilashati Balashvavara Sri Rupa Chintamala Sapti Sangsto Matsvanta Durdanta Haichurastam Raganugami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasara Smaratam Vrajendhum Shri Rupa Pada Kamala Shrita Cheta Samme Chittam Satam Nirupari Madhukari Yatu Pada Padme Bhakterya Nikilarta Varga Jananiya Brahma Sakshat Krite Anandatishaya Prada Vishayajat Sukyat Vimuktiryaya Shri Radha Ramanam Param Bhajayugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Saji Mahanashrayo Vyakarya Vrajalokavat Gurutara Premnaiva Tasyai Namah Yaram ya nikilata sanga shangan nikil Yaram ya nikila sanga shamani shrotratritim sangata Yasvadya rasikai sukabdi janani dhikharya mukti spriham Yadhyata hridaye vrajendra tanuja premamrita syandini Saji Yad Hari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Sri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Swabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again, today we will continue our discussion of Padyavali. And in particular, today we're in this section, which we began in our last reading, on entreaties made when making offerings of food to Bhagavan. So we read this verse where the prayer was made that to Krishna, as you took pleasure in the food offered by the wives of the brāhmaṇas, and the food offered by Vidura, and the food offered by Yaśoda, and the food offered by the gopis, and so on, may you also take pleasure in the food offered by me. So, last time we discussed the celebrated verse in the Gita 9:26, where Krishna says that if you offer me a leaf, flower, a fruit, or water with bhakti, out of bhakti, then I will certainly accept that. So we discussed that last time. So now we're going to move into discussion of each of the offerings made that are mentioned in this verse, or what was so pleasing to Krishna about these offerings that are mentioned in the verse. So the first what we'll look at is the offering made by the wives of the brāhmaṇas. So this will be something like a summary of that whole section of the Bhagavatam in the 10th canto, chapter 23, where this Leela of Krishna being fed by the Brahmanis is described. So we'll look at how the commentators have elaborated on the meaning of statements in the Bhagavatam and enter into the sweetness of this offering. So, I begin from the top of the fresh file. Sri Krishna's receiving food offered to him by wives of brāhmaṇas is described in Srimad Bhagavatam in the 10th canto, chapter 23. Once, while Sri Krishna was out for the day cowherding in the forest, some of his friends accompanying him felt hungry and asked Krishna to find some food for them. Sri Krishna was aware that a community of brāhmaṇas was conducting a yajna nearby, and he sent some of his friends to go and humbly inform the brāhmaṇas that he, Sri Krishna, was nearby, hungry, and begging for some food. The boys did so, but the brāhmaṇas declined to reply to the boys, much less provide them with any food. The boys reported this back to Sri Krishna, who laughed, and then sent the boys to the brāhmanas' wives, advising them as follows. Mam gyapyata patnibhya sasankarsham agatam dasayanti kamamannam vasnigdha mayushita dhiya. Inform the wives that I, along with Sankarshana, have come. They who are affectionate and with mind fixed upon me will gladly give food to you all. Sri Samipad paraphrases this statement of Sri Krishna in his commentary as follows. Quote, they dwell at home only with the body. With the mind they are fixed only upon me. Since they are in this way most affectionate to me, they will give food to you all. So the idea here is that in the verse, Krishna lastly describes them as snigdha and mayi ushita dhiya. So Samipad is extracting that by saying that their mind is fixed on me, the sense is that their mind is not fixed upon the house or upon their household life. So he's thus taking it that they're in the house with the body, but with the mind, they're fixed upon me. And they have such affection for me that they'll naturally or eagerly give food to you, knowing that I'm nearby. So it's noteworthy here that when Krishna tells the boys to go to the brāhmanas, he tells them to ask for food. But when he tells the boys to go to the brahmanis, he just says, tell them I'm here. So this contrast between sending them with a request and then sending them just with an FYI, so to speak, Chakravartipad elaborates as follows. Sri Chakravartipad adds in this regard that by saying this, Sri Krishna precludes any doubt in the minds of his friends as to whether or not the brahmanis will give them food, should they be checked from doing so by their husbands, because the brahmanis' affection for him will result in their not paying any heed to their husbands' objections. Sri Sanatanpad and Sri Jivapad following him also comment that Sri Krishna does not tell his friends to inform the brahmanis that he is hungry, or to ask them for food, because he knows that they will certainly send food for him and his friends as soon as they are informed just that he has arrived nearby, that is, even without being told that he is hungry or that he is asking for food. So this is Sanatana Gosvami, Jiva Gosvami, they're showing the difference between the FYI and the request. And then Chakravartipad, in the middle, he's saying that the boys, they might think, well, we just went to the Brahmins and they wouldn't even talk to us, and now you want to go to their wives, but if we ask the wives are, even if they want to, the husbands are still going to stop them, because the husbands obviously don't want to give us anything from the yajna. So they may have a doubt when Krishna says, oh, go tell the wives I'm here, that, well, what good will that do? Why would the wives give you food anyway? So to to give them or to alleviate any doubt in that regard, Krishna says they are affectionate to me. In other words, they love me. So that love itself is the guarantee that I'll get food from them and that they'll overcome the obstacles to give it to me created by the husbands. So snigdha, or that affectionateness or that love for me, that's no small matter. In other words, if Krishna recognizes that someone has love for him, then that means that the love that person has is really some strong love, or some pure love of a pure nature. So let's see what that love causes to happen next. So the Brahmani's reaction to the words of Sri Krishna's friends is described as follows. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. Okay. Shrutva-chutam upayatam nityam tad darshanotsukaha tad katha-kṣīpta-manaso bhabhuvur jatasam brahmaha chaturvidam bahugunam annam adaya bhajanaihi abhisrasuru priyam sarva samudram iva nimnagaha nishidhyamana patibhir brattribhir bandubhi sutai bhagavatyuttama shloke dirghashruta dhritāṣayaḥ. So, very nice statement. He says, hearing that Achyuta had arrived nearby, they whose hearts had become captivated by talk of him, and were thus ever eager for the sight of him, became affected by excitement. So the implication here is that they've never met Krishna, they've never even seen Krishna, but they've always wanted to, because they've heard so much about him. So this is also, the example is typically given of Rukmini, who offers herself to Krishna in full in a dramatic way, out of love for him that was enkindled in her heart, so to speak, just by hearing about him. So here the Brahmanas' wives are also exemplary in this respect, that they've just heard about Krishna, and thus they've become to the point of feeling love for him, of having their mind fixated upon him, of always being eager to see him, even though they've yet to ever actually meet him. So when they heard, and now he's nearby, then they're affected by excitement. In other words, they're immediately very eager. So, bringing food of the four types, replete with numerous qualities in vessels, all of them, whose minds were resolved by virtue of prolonged hearing about Bhagavan, he of highest praise. So that means Bhagavan is many times in the Bhagavatam called Uttama Shloka, which the commentators have interpreted in various ways. One means he whose shloka, so the word shloka can mean obviously a verse, as it's often used, but the word also means praise in general, not specific to a type of Sanskrit meter or even a poetic composition, but just any form of praise is also called shloka. So Uttama Shloka can mean he whose shloka, or whose praise, is the highest. In other words, whose praise to be most high, or given the highest praise. Or another way it's given elsewhere is that he who's praised by the highest, or by those who are uttama. In other words, the very greatest of bhaktas are those who praise him, or the most exalted of all jivas are those who praise him, etc. So the implication here is that Krishna's high praise is what these Brahmanis have been hearing. So it's stressing again this idea that hearing this very wonderful praises of Krishna elicits such desire for him. Or here it says, minds were resolved. So in other words, they became completely determined that they wanted to meet Krishna, they wanted to do whatever they could for Krishna, just having heard about him for so long. So then it describes the effect. They set out like rivers towards the ocean. In other words, they were going however they could get there. They were going to cross around whatever obstacle was necessary, just as water flows around rocks or around bends or wherever to get to, pulled by the flow of gravity. So the gravity of their attraction to Krishna, or their love for Krishna, their desire for the darshan of Krishna, that's pulling them around all the different obstacles that they encounter. to meet their beloved, although they were being checked by their husbands, brothers, relatives, and sons. So, in other words, as a river has to flow around rocks and other obstructions, then they had to pass through all the objections of all their relatives who were all assembled at this yajna. So, the commentators have given some nice elaboration on the sense here. So it mentions that they bring food of 4 types. Food is categorized in this passage as fourfold in accord with the manner in which it is ingested. That is, as that which is to be drunk, which is to be chewed, which is to be licked, and which is to be sucked. This is more or less just categorical. The Brahmani's food is further described here as replete with numerous qualities, because of its having qualities of fine taste, fine fragrance, fine appearance, and so forth, by virtue of its having been prepared in an excellent manner. So typically people think fine food means food that tastes good, but really if it's fine food, it doesn't just taste good, it also smells good, it also looks good, and so forth, we can say it's also the right temperature, and all other various, appreciable features are found within it. So they are expert in their household duties, and now they get to utilize that expertise to finally feed Krishna, so they, do their very best to every last detail to offer things in an excellent manner. So a wide variety and all of high quality. Sri Sanatana Pad comments in this regard that when the Brahmanis set out to bring the foods to Sri Krishna, they were first checked from doing so by their husbands because of their being under their husband's control. So the verse mentions 4 persons, and the commentator follows the order. In other words, he draws out an illustration or a movie, if you will, of the Leela from the order in which the persons who obstructed them are mentioned. So it mentions first husbands, then brothers, then relatives, and then sons. So he says first, when they started to go, the husbands who are conducting the yajna tried to stop them, and this is within the cultural norms of that society and understanding that the wife is devoted to the husband. She's responsible to follow the directives of the husband. So when they had already declined to send anything to Krishna, and now they're going and giving things to Krishna without even Krishna asking and without taking permission of the husband, when the food is already there and meant to be utilized for this yajna, this is a transgression of dharma as well as a transgression of the husband's authority. So they are, unsatisfied by this, so they tell the wives to stop. But when they disregarded their husband's words, they were then checked by their fathers, who feared... not now, Maharaj. When they disregarded their friends... Sorry, Maharaj is calling me. Let me just tell him. Okay. Okay, where was I? Okay, so they were trying to be stopped by their husbands. When they disregarded their husbands' words, they were then checked by their fathers, who feared they would be rejected by their husbands. So why did the fathers come? Because they thought, if our wives are disobeying their husbands, the husbands might reject them. Then who will protect our daughters? Where will our daughters live? How will they have a livelihood if they're rejected by their husbands? So the fathers, out of love and worry for the daughters, they also tried to stop them. When they disregarded their fathers, they were checked by their brothers, because their brothers had even more affection for them than their fathers. So he takes it that then the brothers come, because the brothers think they also should intervene. This is best for the wives. They'll meet with hardship if they disobey their husbands like this. And even though the fathers tried, the brothers think we should still try too. So this shows that really they had affection for them. If they weren't really that concerned, they would think, oh, they're doing wrong and our fathers also tried, let them meet with the consequences of their actions. But because they cared about them, they tried to intervene to protect them, according to their idea of what would be good for them. When they disregarded even their brothers, they were checked by their sons, because their sons were expectant of further affection and so forth from them. So lastly, the sons come, and the sons are thinking, if our mothers go off like this, our mothers might get rejected by the village community. Then where will we live? Who will look after us? What will happen to us? So they're thinking, Mom, don't do this. I need you. So they were wanting further affection and care from their mothers, so they tried to stop them in that respect. Still, they disregarded even their sons and went out to find Krishna in the forest. They thus more than amply exhibited the eagerness for service that was alluded to by Sri Krishna in the aforesaid statement to Uddhava. So in this verse that we mentioned last time, Krishna says that the word actually in the verse was shraddha, but that was interpreted in the commentary as agraha. So agraha means eagerness or intentness or some almost like zeal to do something. So Krishna says, if even water is offered to me with that, then that is most pleasing to me. But the most lavish offering offered to me by a non-bhakta, I don't even want to accept that. It doesn't bring any pleasure to me. So what really pleases him is that agraha, is that enthusiasm or that eagerness to serve. So even a simple thing given with a lot of eagerness is profoundly pleasing, whereas an elaborate thing but given without that the spirit doesn't please him. So that was something we covered last time. So I'm just sort of threading this together and saying, so how much agraha did they have? In other words, if they're risking their entire, status as reputable members of their community and their marriages and, the acceptance of their families and all of this ongoing, then they were really quite intensely eager to render this service to Krishna. So therefore, the food that they offer, how pleasing is that to him? Sri Sanatana Pad also explains in this regard that the non-mention of their mothers, so this is the commentator bringing out more. In other words, if it mentions bandhus, which he's interpreting to mean fathers, relative meaning the principal relative, the father, so the husband, the father, the friends, the brothers, and the sons. So the verse doesn't mention mothers. So why not? So he's giving an explanation that the non-mention of their mothers can be understood to be because their mothers accompanied their fathers. So it says bandhu, which in this context Sanatana Gosvami is interpreting to mean father, because often people think bandhu means friend, and it does, but more broadly it means someone with whom you have a bond, and often is used to refer to kinsman or relative of a relative, meaning anyone you have a bond with, a relative of any type. So he's interpreting the word bandhu here to mean father, and then saying that bandhu can mean father and mother, because by mentioning, it's in the male gender, the word, but in Sanskrit you can refer to a parents or to a group of relatives of mixed gender using only the male gender. So he's saying that you could take it that mothers are included by that mention of bandhu in the verse. Or, because their mothers also had bhav for Krishna like their daughters did, and thus their mothers did not check their daughters from going to meet Krishna. Or he doesn't mention the mothers because the mothers actually were rooting for them, and the mothers actually had love for Krishna just like they did, and weren't ashamed or weren't upset with the daughters at all, but rather were, passively in support, so to speak. So you could take it either way. So now there's a verse which is fairly well known, which describes the darshan that they have of Krishna. Now that they've made this ultimate risk, they've taken this extreme step, They're overflowing with this eagerness, with this intentness to have darshan of Krishna out of their love for him. Their mind has been riveted on him for so long, and now at last they behold him. So how do they see him? How is his appearance described? Then that comes here in this verse. So after thus disregarding all their relatives, the Brahmanis found Sri Krishna in the forest. So the verse goes like this. Yamuno pavane ashoka navapalava mandite vicharantam vritam gopai sagrajam dadrishu striyaha shamam hiranya paridhim vanamalya barha datu pravalanata veshamanu vritang se vinyasta hastamitarena dunanam abjam karnot palalakakopolamukabjahasam. So it says, in a wood decorated with fresh ashok buds along the bank of the Yamuna. So the ashok buds are these kind of blossom clusters of reddish orangish buds. So in other words, on the bank of the Jamuna, in a wood with fresh blooming red and orange flowers all around, some dark hue of the Jamuna behind. So you have green, you have red, you have orange, you have a deep blue, perhaps some brown of the ground cover. So you have this beautiful palette of colors. And on that backdrop, the women saw him roaming, surrounded by cowherds, along with his elder brother. He had a swarthy complexion, golden garments, decoration like a dancer, with forest garlands, peacock feathers, minerals, and shoots. One hand placed on the shoulder of a companion, with the other twirling a lotus, blue lilies on his ears, locks over his cheeks, and a smile on his lotus face. So, the commentators have elaborated on this a bit. Sri Chakravartipad comments in this regard that Sri Krishna twirls a lotus in his hand as he meets the Brahmanis. So, generally speaking, this would be what's called a play lotus. Often in the various, Nikunja literature, you hear of Radharani holding a play lotus, sometimes hitting Shyamasundar with it. In this case, Krishna is holding a play lotus as he awaits their arrival. So what does he say, so to speak, with the gesture of this lotus? So Sri Krishna twirls a lotus in his hand as he meets the brāhmanas to indicate to them that by giving them this sight of himself, he has taken the lotuses of their hearts into his hand. In other words, it's as if he's twirling this lotus like, I've got your heart now. Or is twirling their hearts with eagerness. In other words, that this is their heart, and his twirling of it is showing that he's also eager for this meeting just as they are. Or to suggest that by seeing them, his own heart now twirls with eagerness. Or the lotus can represent his own heart, as if to say that you've come making such a sacrifice, showing such eagerness, and now my heart is blossoming and twirling like this lotus in my hand. Sri Sanatana Pad also comments that Sri Krishna did not hold or play his flute at this time. So this, I personally find quite an interesting observation, that Krishna is not mentioned, nothing is mentioned here about the flute. Whereas in a similar description, when you hear the gopis arrive for the Rasa Leela, there's vivid description of the flute playing and Krishna's appearance with the flute and so forth. But here when the Brahmanis come, no flute. And, Krishna being a flute player is so central to his image, so to speak, in the hearts of bhaktas. So for Sanatana Gosvami, this is evidently absent. Why wasn't he playing the flute? If these bhaktas, these brahmanis are coming to him out of such love for him, wouldn't he play the flute? Wouldn't he show his, loving reciprocation with their act of love and coming to him by doing what is most characteristic and mystically charming? So the Bhagavatam makes no mention of this, so Sanatana Gosvami takes that non-mention as indeed an absence, or in other words, that it's not that it's an, he was touring a lotus, and of course he also played the flute even though it wasn't mentioned. He doesn't interpret it like that. Rather, Sanatana Pad also comments that Sri Krishna did not hold or play his flute at this time, because the flute is supremely enchanting, and thus inapt for his meeting with a group of brahmanis. So the full significance of this will come out as we see how ultimately Krishna deals with this situation. But at this stage, let's just say that although he knows that they're deeply enchanted with him, he doesn't want them any more enchanted than they already are. They're plenty enchanted at this point, and he actually wants to not let it go any further. So we'll see why and how as the discussion goes on. So no flute, in this case, just a lotus. So indeed showing some excitement of his own heart, some loving gesture of reciprocation, but not too much. So how did the brahmanis react when finally, after so long, having heard so much, having now sacrificed so much, they finally get Krishna's darshan? So that's described in this verse. It says, Praya Shruta Priyatamodaya Karnapurai Yasmin Nimagna Manasas Tam Atakshi-randrai Anta Pravesha Suchiram Parirabhya Tapam Pragyam Yatabhimatayo Vijahru Narendra Tastata Tyakta Sarvasha Prapta. So then, taking into their hearts through the aperture of their eyes, he in whom their minds had been immersed, by means of the earrings of hearing profusely of his, their beloved's, excellences, they embraced him for a very long time, and completely gave up their distress. So what does distress refer to? It can be taken to mean that produced by samsara, meaning worldly distress in general, or the distress caused by the obstruction from their family, or that produced by separation from him. The distress they felt in separation from him, that was alleviated when they finally got to see him. So it doesn't just say that they saw him, but rather it says that they, through the holes or the apertures of their eyes, brought him into their hearts and embraced him. And this is also a poetic way of describing someone as loving to hear about Krishna, as, so to speak, wearing the earrings of hearing about him. That, earrings can ornament the ears, but the greatest ornament upon the ears is the sounds of Krishna Katha going into the ears. So their ears have been ornamented so elaborately in this manner. So then they feel a complete relief of all distress, having now at last beheld him. And then it gives an analogy. Just like self-referential mentations embrace the pragya. So this is a little bit of an Upanishadic illustration. So the idea is that the witness of deep sleep, namely the Atma, so the commentator takes the word pragya to mean Atma. So just as the mind, all the different functioning going on in the psyche, comes to a state of complete rest and peace when one goes into deep sleep, then just like that, all the distress that they felt was just gone as they beheld him with their eyes. So the witness of deep sleep, the self, and dissolve into him along with all the distress they create. In this way, they by whom all desires had been relinquished arrived. So we, again illustrating what you might call the, primary extrinsic characteristic of Uttama Bhakti, annabhilashita shunyam, free from desirousness of anything else. So here it says, they by whom all desires had been relinquished. Means, of course, not their desire for Krishna, or their desire to serve Krishna, their desire for bhakti, but rather they had forsaken every other possible desire or object of desire for the sake of that. So in this way, they arrived. They arrived and felt this complete release, or this complete sense of peace. So here the Brahmanis are shown to be endowed with the quote, pure-heartedness of non-desirousness of everything other than bhakti, spoken of earlier by the commentators on Bhagavad Gita 9.26. So we can recall from the last reading that this famous verse, if you offer me a leaf, a flower, a fruit, water, I will accept it, I will partake of it. Lastly, it says, prayatmanaha, that whose offering is accepted like that? Just anybody's? Rather, the person who is prayata atmanaha, or prayatma atma. So that meant, according to the commentators, someone who's nishkama, or free from other desires. In other words, if someone offers some food but they just want some boon in return, Krishna's not so impressed and happily partaking of that. But if they're offering this to him just for the sake of offering it to him, just for the sake of pleasing him, without any other string attached, without any other expectation or desire from that offering, then that makes them prayataha, meaning that makes them pure, or that makes them desireless. So here, that the statement in the Bhagavatam directly mirrors that statement in the Gita, that they've come to make this offering and they fit this category of being prayata atma. So, Sri Krishna welcomes the Brahmanis, speaks kind words to them, and then tells them to return back and assist in completing the yajna being conducted by their husbands. The Brahmanis, however, object, saying that Sri Krishna should not harshly send them away like this, since their family members will not accept them back, after they disregarded all the prohibitions their family members made and defiantly came to meet him. Sri Krishna assures them that no one will fault them for meeting with him, and explains that intimate relations between them, Brahmanis, and himself, a cowherd or gopa, are not acceptable to society or to himself. So although they've given up everything and come to him in this way, he doesn't accept them the way he accepts the gopis. He doesn't engage in intimate exchanges with them the way he does with the gopis. Rather, he sends them back, but tells them not to worry that they're going to get in trouble, so to speak. Don't worry, you won't get in trouble. And he also explains why not. He says that it's not suitable, it's not acceptable to me to have intimate relations with Brahmanis. I'm a gopa, I'm a cowherd, I just don't feel that way towards Brahmanis. So the Brahmanis accept Sri Krishna's wish, return and complete the sacrifice with their husbands, who do not hold them at fault. So, while this undoubtedly might have been disappointing or heartbreaking to the Brahmanis, nevertheless, they were pure in their desire to please Krishna. So when they understood that this is actually what would be pleasing to him, to not interact more intimately, but rather for them to return to their conventional activities, then they accepted that, they did that. And thereafter, Krishna partakes of the food the Brahmanis brought for him. So, he does relish their offerings, however. He does accept their seva in some way, in a way suitable for a gopa to accept from a Brahmani. So, Bhagavan api govindas tenai vanena gopakan chaturvidhena ashayitva swayam cha babuje prabhu evam lila nara bapur nrilokam anushilayan Reme go gopa gopinam ramayan rupavakritai. Sri Sanatana Pad explains that Sri Shukadeva Goswami speaks of Krishna as, quote, although Bhagavan, or Bhagavan api Govinda. In other words, Govinda, although he's Bhagavan, and as, quote, Prabhu, here, to indicate that although Krishna is replete with omnipotence and fulfillment, such that neither he nor his companions are ever actually devoid of food or troubled by hunger, still he personally served and fed his friends the food brought by the brāhmaṇas out of great affection for his friends, and then ate some of the food himself to show special favor to these brāhmaṇas. So Shukadeva has an audience of sages. Sages are very much, hold in high regard the quality of atma-ramatva, or satisfaction that comes by means of the self. And if Bhagavan is understood to be, if Govinda is understood to be a manifestation of the paratattva, if anything has the quality of atma-ramata, it's the paratattva. And now you're saying that he's hungry and he can't even feed his friends? If he's, the manifester of the entire universe and the regulator of everything and the Lord of innumerable, coexistent universes and existent in Vaikuntha and all this, he can't feed a few of his friends in the forest? Come on. So if persons are hung on that angle of vision, so to speak, then it's saying, although he's Bhagavan, in other words, he doesn't, yes, it's true, in one sense, he doesn't need to be doing any of this. He's all-sufficient and could have easily fed his own friends, but rather he still fed them in this way and partook of the offering from these brāhmaṇas. So, although Bhagavan, Govinda fed the young cowherds with the food of 4 types, and being Prabhu partook of it himself. Thus, following the ways of human beings, he of playful human figure delighted the cows, cowherd men, and cowherd women with his figure, speech, and deeds, and thus enjoyed himself. So, although Krishna is replete with omnipotence and fulfillment, such that neither he nor his companions are ever actually devoid of food or troubled by hunger, still he personally served and fed his friends the food brought by the brāhmaṇas, out of great affection for his friends. In other words, it's not that the food came and he said, okay, you're hungry? Okay, I arranged the food, have it. But rather, he arranged all of this and then he personally came and he's putting food into their mouth and, most likely joking and having fun and, personally relating with them in a friendly manner. And he, according to this comment, and he also ate some of it himself. And why? Because he wanted to favor these brāhmaṇas who had such devotion to him. Sri Sanatana Pad further comments that, quote, following the ways of human beings can alternately be understood to mean that he continuously acts like human beings because prema for him is generally attained only by way of his lila that resembles the ways of the world. Or to mean that he teaches, that is, propagates bhakti to himself in the world of human beings. So this is also a nice comment. So one way is that his lila resembles the lila of human life, and in this way by feeding his friends and so on, he's performing a lila that is human-like, even though he's not bound by human limitations, by virtue of his, ontological status as the supreme entity and so on. So that's one sense. Or he's saying that he continuously acts like human beings because prema for him is generally attained only by way of his lila that resembles the ways of the world. So what this means is that Bhagavan performs these leelas or acts like a human being because it's only by hearing about, by meditating upon, by aspiring to participate in that type of leela that jivas in this world can attain prema for him. In other words, if they think that he is all-sufficient and doesn't need anything, then this sense of love that engenders a sense of myness, that engenders a sense of responsibility, that lodges within the understanding of the bhakta the idea that Bhagavan will be deeply pleased with what I offer him out of love, that can't come about if someone doesn't think that Bhagavan actually will feel those things, that Bhagavan will actually have that human-like state of mind in which he can be delighted by offerings, in which, so to speak, to put it in colloquial language, his mind can be blown by love that people express for him. And so this type of lila is necessary, so to speak, to experience prema of that degree of intensity or richness. And he needs to also perform that lila in the world such that it can be recorded by sages and kavis, such that bhaktas can hear about it, such that they can aspire to it, such that they can then also, receive into the heart a manifestation of such prema. So this is a nice comment of Sanatana Pad. Alright, then, Sri Jiva Pad adds in this regard that Sri Krishna's feeding the Brahmanis food to his friends and eating it himself also indicates that the Brahmanis had a special form of bhakti to him. That the amount of food they sent wasn't enough for all of his friends, yet Krishna, being Bhagavan, ensured it became enough to satisfy them all. That Sri Shukadev Goswami Pad speaking of Krishna as Prabhu indicates that Sri Shukadev Goswami Pad felt astonished by the unbounded favor Sri Krishna showed the Brahmanis in this lila, and that such lilas of Krishna are loci of all forms of prema. Sorry, I'm just crunching, the whole kind of gist of Jiva Goswami's analysis into a long sentence there. But the idea is that the fact that he personally ate the food himself shows that he felt compelled to do so because the Brahmanis had a special type of bhakti. In other words, if it had been bhakti from someone else, he might not have bothered to eat it himself. But because the Brahmanis really had a special type of bhakti, that inspired him to want to eat the food also himself. And then here, Jiva Goswami is sort of different than Sanatana Goswami, where Sanatana Goswami is regulating the mention of Bhagavan and Prabhu to the side, and then Jiva Goswami is, so to speak, later, when they're aside, bringing them back in and saying, it's just Krishna, he's just doing human lila, but he's mentioned also as Bhagavan because he ornaments or enriches this human-like lila using some of that Aishvarya in order to make it more relishable. Or in other words, they sent all this food for him, but it wasn't enough to feed everybody, but everybody would be happy if they got some, so he made sure everybody did. This is where Aishvarya comes to serve Madhurya, so to speak. This is how Jiva Goswami takes it. And that because there's a mention of Bhagavan and then again Prabhu, both names being indicative of one who's possessed of powers or immanence or excellence that's beyond conventional human scope, then the second you have to explain why does Shukadev Goswami bother saying it twice. So Jiva Goswami is saying, okay, the second mention means it's to indicate that Shukadev Goswami felt, amazed by this, or that the second one was to, so to speak, convey the chamadkar, or the astonishment or the wonder that the Leela produced, that thus, this second name was mentioned, that the way Krishna, drew out this loving expression from the Brahmanis, and then, the way that he reciprocated with it on all these different levels, this thoroughly astonished Shukadev. So this is Prabhu, this is Krishna, he is at his finest here, weaving all these elements together. And that throughout this Leela, there are, Leelas of Krishna are loci of all forms of prema. In other words, you have some Madhura prema, you have some aspect of Vatsalya here, you have an aspect of Sakhya, you have all these elements flowing together. Okay, then so we've got Sanatana Pad and Jiva Goswami on this, so now let's see what Chakravarti Pad adds. Sri Chakravarti Pad also comments that the word cha indicates that Krishna ate even though he did not desire to eat at this time, because he felt sorrowful after breaking the resolves of the Brahmanis. who had forsaken everything, and come to him out of prema for him, with the hope of serving him in an amorous manner. So it says, he fed all his friends, and he ate some himself. There's this cha in there. And grammatically, you don't need the cha when you use in Sanskrit or many Indian languages. They use a lot of gerunds, and you have, or non-finite verbs. And when you put a non-finite verb with a finite verb, like feeding the others, he ate some himself, is a much more common way of speaking in Sanskrit or in Bengali or languages like that than the way we say in English, he fed his friends and he ate some himself. So you wouldn't necessarily get this from the translation, but from that idiomatic manner of speaking, the cha or the and is unnecessary. So Chakravarti Pad is saying, why is this cha in there? It doesn't need to be there, so it has to convey something. So by saying he feeding all of his friends, he also ate himself, and he ate himself, then he's implying that this eating of himself is something else. So what is the sense? It's implying that he didn't want to eat because he was feeling sad. And typically eating is meant to be done in a mood of happiness. Humor complements it well, but to eat in anger, to eat in sadness is not advised. So Krishna was feeling a bit sad because he didn't give the Brahmanis everything that they wanted. But nevertheless, so he didn't really want to eat while he was feeling sad. But still, he ate, to honor what they gave him. So the cha is there to convey that. So, just from this little particle, you get this whole kind of emotional subtlety of Krishna's experience in Chakravarti Pad's vision. So he also explains that Sri Krishna does not accept such amorous service from the Brahmanis as he does from the gopis, because Leela of that type with Brahmanis would lack excellence, and thus not be satisfying. I think I need a 2. Those of refined taste like himself. A very necessary comment. In other words, Krishna is Rasika-shekhar. He's not just a Rasika, not just, some rasa came along so he'll have it. Not like that. But he is a Rasika, he's the pinnacle, he's the ultimate relisher of rasa. So when really you care about something, you won't let your standard of excellence slacken just to have some. It's either the best of the best, it's either as it's meant to be or not. So in that sense, the full rasa is only really possible with the gopis. With the Brahmanis, it just wouldn't be the same. The same sanskars, the same disposition, the same sentiments, the same attitudes, the same manner of expression, the same dress. It all just won't quite be there. So, no. Better nothing than not the real thing. So, something like that. It would lack excellence and thus be unsatisfying to him. In other words, he's the ultimate relisher of rasa. All the elements have to be right on in tune for it to really come out right. Just as, someone, let's say, who's, really great, really aficionado of classical music. If they hear someone playing some instrument and the instrument is out of tune or something is not synchronized properly in the orchestra, it's like, no. Whereas common people, they might not even notice and think, oh yeah, this is fine, this is nice. But as, refinement and as appreciation for subtlety come, so also comes, in one sense, an intolerance or, a lack of ability to appreciate what is less refined is also eroded to the extent that one's attunement to finer appreciation develops. But when you're Bhagavan, that's not a problem. Anyway. Well, should I stop here? I don't know if we'll have time to get through. I have a little bit more on this, but I think it'll go over time. So let's stop here and let's leave it on a cliffhanger, and we'll find out how this Leela culminates next time. So, as I said, we're looking at why all of these offerings made to Krishna were pleasing, and why the author of the verse under discussion is praying, may I make an offering that's pleasing to you, like you took pleasure in the offering of these brahmanis. So how and why the offering of these brahmanis was so pleasing to Krishna, and how he reciprocated and took pleasure in that, that's what we're drawing out from all these commentaries on the 10th canto. So we'll complete that discussion and move on to the next example of Vidura's offering in our next discussion. If anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or any other feedback, please feel free.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Go for it.
Okay, we discussed it last time extensively years and years ago with Narayan Marasanga.
Okay.
And two more reasons why Krishna sent the Brahmanis back to their husbands. One is that he is a Vaishya and they are Brahmanis, and there's no mixing of the two castes. He was very strict. And the other reason is that these Brahmanis, even though they had pure love for Krishna, they were not in the Anugati of the gopis. Gopi Anugati Avina, Ashvaryagyane, Bhajile Opainai, Vrajendranandana. So is that unless someone is in Chaitanya Charitamrita, unless one is in the Anugati of the gopis, he cannot join Krishna in Vraj as a lover.
All right. Thank you for sharing.
That's it.
Yeah, I think perhaps the mention here I gave of that he was a Gopa would be parallel to the idea that he's a Vaishya. And indeed, thank you for adding that.
Oh, thank you. That was a very lively presentation. Which verse in Padyavali are we looking at?
We're on 115. 115.
What's the first word? Shamam Hiranya Paridim?
No, that's in the Bhagavatam. This is dvija-strīṇāṁ is the first compound. Dvija-strīṇāṁ. The
Okay.
Dvija-stri, the wife of the Dvijas, of the twice-born of the Brahmanas. Here, I'll read the translation of the verse we're discussing.
And just to mention something, change the subject. Baba is always asking about you. How is Krishna Sharan doing?
Well, please convey my pranams to the affectionate Babaji Maharaj. And you can tell him with his Ashirvad I'm well.
Okay.
So this verse, just to recap, it says, O Krishna, as you felt delight in the meal of the Brahmanas' wives, the moderate food of Vidura, the yogurt and milk of Braja's cows, the palmful of broken flat rice from your friend, the breast milk of Yaśodāyāḥ, and the sweets offered by the young girls of Braja, may you do so in this offering as well. In other words, in my offering. As you took pleasure in all of their offerings, may you also find pleasure in mine. So, if that's it, we can conclude here for today. And next time we'll look a little further at the wives of the Brahmanas, and then we'll also hear about Vidura. Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Radhe Shyam.